We are looking today at a figure in American music who represents a very specific and perhaps underappreciated bridge in the history of rock and roll. For those of you listening, if the name Bobby Fuller registers at all, it usually brings to mind one specific song or perhaps the vague outline of a tragedy that took place in Hollywood in the mid-60s. But when you look at the actual documentation of his life, you find a narrative that is much more complex than just a one-hit wonder who died young.
It is, it's certainly more complex. To really define the scope of what we're analyzing today, we are looking at a musician who managed to rise to national prominence right in the middle of the 1960s, which was, a time of massive cultural upheaval. And he achieved a hit record that has endured for decades. And then, at the absolute peak of that success, he died under circumstances that remain ambiguous to this day. He was only 23 years old.
Right. So our task is to look at the trajectory that took him from regional success in Texas to the machinery of the music industry in Los Angeles.
Yes, and then to examine the unresolved ending of that life.
Exactly. Our goal here is to establish the factual record. We want to understand his production techniques, which were quite advanced for his time and resources, his discography, and the specific forensic details surrounding his death and his legacy. We are going to adhere strictly to the available documentation. We are not here to speculate beyond what is provided in the source text, but rather to organize those facts for you into a clear picture.
That is the correct approach. We need to be disciplined about this. The structure of this analysis will be chronological. We will start with his birth in 1942, follow the development of his career in El Paso, and the move to Los Angeles. Then we will conduct a detailed analysis of the forensic facts regarding his death in 1966.
And finally, we will conclude by looking at the posthumous releases and the cultural impact that has kept his name in circulation up to recent years. Let's begin with the biographical foundations. We need to place him in time and geography.
Right. Bobby Fuller was born Robert Gaston Fuller on October 20, 1942. His place of birth was Baytown, Texas.
And regarding the family unit he was born into, what do the records indicate about his structure and early movements?
His parents were Lawson Shepard Fuller and Eva Lorraine Barrett Fuller. It was a household of 3 boys. There was an older half-brother on the maternal side named Jack. Bobby was the middle child, and he had a younger brother named Randy.
Randy Fuller becomes a crucial part of the musical story later on, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. Now, regarding their movements, they did not stay in the Baytown area. When Bobby was still a small child, the family moved to Salt Lake City, Utah. They remained in Utah for a significant portion of his childhood, staying there until 1956.
1956 is the year they returned to Texas, correct?
Yes. In 1956, the family relocated to El Paso, Texas. This move was dictated by his father's profession. Lawson Fuller secured a job at El Paso Natural Gas. This geographical shift is important because it places Bobby Fuller in a specific cultural environment right as he is entering adolescence.
That year, 1956, is often cited as a watershed moment in American culture, particularly regarding music. How did that specific time frame impact Fuller?
It is impossible to overstate the significance of 1956. That was the year Elvis Presley exploded into the national consciousness. The source material is very specific here. It notes that Bobby Fuller became mesmerized by this new rock and roll star. This was the catalyst. It set the entire trajectory for his life. However, while Elvis was the initial spark, Fuller's musical evolution took a slightly different turn. He soon adopted the style of a fellow Texan, Buddy Holly.
That distinction seems important. Elvis was the icon, but Buddy Holly was the template.
Exactly. Fuller began fronting a 4-man combo, which was the Buddy Holly model. 2 guitars, bass, and drums. And notably, even at this early stage, he was focusing on original material rather than relying solely on covers, which was the standard for many local bands at the time.
Let's move into the development phase, specifically the years between 1958 and 1964 in El Paso. This is where he really crafted his identity.
This period is the crucible. During the early 1960s, Fuller was extremely active in the local scene, playing clubs and bars throughout El Paso. But if we only focus on the live performances, we miss the most interesting part of his development. The most significant work he did during this time was as a recording artist and a producer.
He wasn't just playing songs.
No, he was learning how to capture them. He recorded on several independent labels, including Yucca, Exeter, and Eastwood.
You mentioned the band lineup earlier. Was the personnel consistent during these El Paso years?
It was fluid. The lineup changed as musicians came and went, which is typical for young bands. However, there was one constant anchor throughout this entire period, and that was his younger brother, Randy Fuller, on bass. That fraternal connection provided a stable foundation for the sound.
I want to focus on his role as a producer. The sources describe a very DIY approach to his early recordings. What specific details do we have about how he was achieving his sound in El Paso?
This is where Fuller really distinguishes himself from his peers. While most bands were saving up money to go into a professional studio, Fuller was building his own. With the exception of 2 songs recorded at the Norman Petty Studios in Clovis, New Mexico, which was where Buddy Holly recorded, so that was likely a pilgrimage for him, and a session at Yucca Records, the majority of his independent releases were recorded in the Fuller's own home studio.
When the records say home studio in the context of the early 1960s, what exactly does that imply? This isn't like today where you can just buy a laptop and an interface.
No, not at all. This required physical engineering. It was primitive, but incredibly ingenious. The sources detail that he actually constructed a primitive echo chamber in his backyard.
In the backyard.
Yes. In that era, natural reverb was often achieved by piping sound into a reflective room and recording the result. He built a structure specifically to achieve that sonic quality. In terms of the electronic equipment, he was using a mixing board that he had purchased from a local radio station, along with a couple of microphones. He essentially built a broadcast quality, albeit primitive, recording chain in his own home.
That suggests a level of technical dedication that goes well beyond just wanting to be famous. How did he refine these skills?
It was a process of trial and error, but he also created his own opportunities for practice. The quality of the recordings he produced in this home setup was high enough that he began allowing other local acts to use his studio for free.
For free? That is surprising.
Yes, but we should understand the motivation there. It wasn't necessarily just altruism, it served as a training ground. By recording different bands, different instruments, and different voices, he was perfecting his production capabilities. He was learning how to balance levels, how to place microphones, and how to utilize that backyard echo chamber effectively. He was becoming an engineer.
So by 1964, he has the band, he has the sound, and he has the technical know-how. This leads to the major geographical shift in the narrative.
That is the turning point.
Yeah.
In 1964, the band, now formerly known as the Bobby Fuller Four, left Texas and moved to Los Angeles.
And upon arriving in Los Angeles, they managed to break into the industry. Who was the key contact there?
They signed with Mustaine Records. The central figure in this relationship was the producer Bob Keane. It is important to contextualize Bob Keane to understand why this match made sense. Keane was famous for discovering Ritchie Valens. He was also noted for producing surf music.
I see.
So in Bobby Fuller, Keane likely saw a combination of those elements. A young rocker with a Texas background, similar to the Valens aesthetic, but who could also play the surf style.
Once they are established in Los Angeles with Mustang Records, does the band lineup stabilize?
Yes. This is the classic lineup that is credited on the major recordings. You have Bobby Fuller on vocals and guitar. You have his brother Randy Fuller on bass. You have Jim Reese on guitar and Dwayne Carrico on drums.
Let's analyze the sound they were creating in Los Angeles. The mid-60s musical landscape was dominated by the British invasion and the emerging folk rock scene. How did Bobby Fuller fit into that environment?
He was actually something of a contrarian. At a time when everyone was trying to sound like the Beatles or the Byrds, Fuller stuck to that classic Buddy Holly style. It was pure rock and roll, but updated with what the sources describe as Tex-Mex flourishes.
Who were the specific influences that shaped this hybrid sound?
Obviously, Buddy Holly was the primary template. But if you analyze the recordings, both the covers and his originals, you hear direct influences from Eddie Cochran, the Beatles, Little Richard, and the Everly Brothers. There is also, inevitably, the influence of Elvis Presley.
You mentioned Bob Keane's background in surf music. Did that element manifest in Fuller's playing?
It did. The sources point out a lesser-known ability of Fuller's, which was his skill at emulating reverb-laden surf guitar. He could play in the style of Dick Dale or The Ventures. So the Bobby Fuller sound was really a synthesis of Texas rockabilly, the vocal harmonies of the Everly Brothers, and the aggressive, reverb-heavy guitar tones of the California surf scene.
Let's look at the commercial results of this synthesis. What were the hits that broke through?
The first top 40 hit was Let Her Dance. It is significant to note that this was a self-penned song, validating his songwriting ability.
And following that came the song that defines his legacy.
Yes. The second hit was I Fought the Law. This track peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 during the week of March 12th through March 19th, 1966. That was the apex of his commercial success.
They did follow it up with another charting single, correct?
They did. The group's third top 40 single was Love's Made a Fool of You. This was a cover of a Buddy Holly song, which brings that primary influence full circle.
I want to spend a moment on I Fought the Law. Even though it is the song most associated with Fuller, it wasn't an original composition.
No, it was not. The song was written and originally recorded by Sonny Curtis. Sonny Curtis was a member of the Crickets, Buddy Holly's band, and he took over after Holly's death. So even though Fuller didn't write it, the song came directly from the Buddy Holly lineage that Fuller idolized.
There is a technical detail in the sources regarding the recording of I Fought the Law. It appears there are two versions.
That is correct. There are two distinct versions recorded by Fuller. There's the version that was pressed as the 45 RPM single, which became the hit, and there was a re-recording that was issued on the album.
What distinguishes them?
The musical arrangements are identical. However, the vocals by Fuller are slightly different. It's a subtle difference, but for collectors and historians, it is a notable distinction in the discography.
So in early 1966, Bobby Fuller is a national star. He has a top 10 hit, he is getting airplay, and he is living in Hollywood. This brings us to July of 1966. We need to transition now to the events of July 18th.
This is where the narrative shifts from a musical biography to a forensic report. On July 18, 1966, Bobby Fuller was found dead.
Let's look at the specific circumstances of the discovery. Where was he found?
He was found inside an automobile which was parked right outside his Hollywood apartment.
And just to reiterate the timeline, this is happening while his music is still on the charts.
Yes, this occurred within months of I Fought the Law being a top 10 record. He was at the absolute height of his visibility.
An autopsy was performed to determine the cause of death. We need to go through those findings in detail. Who conducted the examination?
The autopsy was performed by Jerry Nelson, a Los Angeles deputy medical examiner. The physical examination of the body revealed very specific and somewhat confusing signs. The report states that Fuller's face, chest, and side were covered in petechial hemorrhages.
For the benefit of the listener, we should clarify what that term usually implies and what the report attributed it to in this case.
Petechial hemorrhages are tiny broken blood vessels. In forensic science, they are often associated with asphyxiation or strangulation. However, the autopsy report in this case attributed the hemorrhages to being probably caused by gasoline vapors and the summer heat.
Was there any other evidence of physical trauma?
This is where the ambiguity deepens. According to the source text, which cites the writer Dean Kuipers, the examiner found no bruises, no broken bones, and no cuts. There was no evidence of a beating or a struggle recorded in the official autopsy.
The classification of the manner of death seems to have been a source of conflict from the very beginning.
It was handled with a high degree of uncertainty. The official report had checkboxes for the manner of death, such as accident and suicide. Kuipers notes a very significant detail here. The boxes for both accident and suicide were checked, but question marks were placed next to these boxes. The authorities themselves seemed unable to commit to a conclusion at the scene.
Did they ever reach a final official determination?
Eventually, the official cause was changed from suicide to accident.
However, the sources indicate that this official ruling has not satisfied everyone.
That is an understatement. Despite the official ruling of an accident, there is a persistent belief among some commentators and those close to the situation that Fuller was murdered. The disconnect between the condition of the body, the location, and the official explanation has kept these theories alive.
This mystery has kept the story in the public eye long after 1966.
Yes, the case was profiled in a segment of the television program Unsolved Mysteries. That broadcast introduced the details of the case, including the ambiguity of the autopsy, to a much wider audience years after the fact.
Where was Bobby Fuller finally laid to rest?
He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills of Los Angeles.
I want to look at how this story has been processed culturally. The combination of the music and the mystery has generated a lot of media coverage and artistic tribute.
It has. The interest is enduring. For instance, NPR's program All Things Considered revisited the case in a broadcast on May 11, 2015.
They were discussing a specific book during that program, correct?
Yes. They were discussing the book titled I Fought the Law, The Life and Strange Death of Bobby Fuller. This book is significant because it was written by Miriam Linna, with contributions from Randy Fuller, Bobby's brother, and bandmate, so it represents an inside perspective on the events.
The impact is also visible in the number of tributes from other musicians. It seems many artists have felt compelled to reference Fuller in their own work.
The list is extensive and it crosses genre lines. You have the New York City Celtic rock band Black 47. They released a song titled Who Killed Bobby Fuller on their 1994 album Home of the Brave.
And that specific title appeared again later.
It did. The Atlanta indie rock band The Rocketeens released a song with the exact same title, Who Killed Bobby Fuller, on their debut album in 1996. It seems the question itself became a motif.
There are also references from some of the architects of rock and punk.
Lou Reed is the most prominent example. On his 1978 album Street Hassle, on the track Dirt, Reed references both Bobby Fuller by name and the song I Fought the Law.
Moving into more recent decades, do we still see these citations?
We do. The band Metric referenced him in their single Monster Hospital in 2006.
And there are some tributes that are more personal or direct.
Yes. In 2013, Terry Manning released a tribute album called West Texas Skyline. Manning is noted in the sources as a friend and mentor to Fuller, so that project was very personal. Then in 2016, the band Holy Wave, who were originally from El Paso, released California, took My Bobby away on their album Freaks of Nurture. And finally, in 2017, Chuck Prophet released an album titled Bobby Fuller Died for Your Sins.
It is clear that for musicians, he remains a potent symbol. I want to make sure we give due attention to the actual body of work he left behind. We mentioned the hits, but the discography is surprisingly deep for such a short career. Let's review the studio albums first.
In his lifetime, there were two primary studio albums, KRLA, King of the Wheels, released in 1965, and I Fought the Law, released in 1966.
The story of his career is arguably best told through his singles. If we look at the progression of labels, we can see the trajectory we discussed earlier. Let's walk through the original U.S. singles.
This list really illustrates the grind and the growth. We start in the early 60s with a Yucca label. In 1961, he released You're in Love, backed with Guess We'll Fall in Love. He actually re-recorded that and released it again on Yucca in 1962. Also in 1962, on Yucca, came gently My Love, backed with My Heart Jumped.
Then we see the shift to the Eastwood label.
Right. Later in 1962, on Eastwood, he released Nervous Breakdown, backed with Not Fade Away. Not Fade Away is another direct Buddy Holly connection.
Moving into 1963 and 1964.
In 1963, on the Todd label, he released Saturday Night, backed with Stringer. Then in 1964, on Exeter, we see a flurry of activity. Wine, 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 backed with King of the Beach. Then She's My Girl, backed with an early version of I Fought the Law. And Fool of Love, backed with Shakedown.
And then we reach the Mustang era, which is the professional breakthrough.
The Mustang discography runs from 1964 to 1966. It begins with Wolfman, backed with Thunder Reef, released in January 1965. Then Take My Word, backed with She's My Girl, later in 1965.
And then the run of hits we discussed.
Exactly. Let Her Dance, backed with Another Sad and Lonely Night. Then Never to Be Forgotten, backed with You Kiss Me. And the massive one, I Fought the Law, backed with Little Annie Lou, all in 1965.
And the final releases in 1966.
In 1966, Mustang released Love's Made a Fool of You, backed with Don't Ever Let Me Know. Then The Magic Touch, backed with My True Love. There was also an alternate issue of that single that featured I'm a Lucky Guy as the B-side.
There is one final single noted that involves a vocal contribution from his brother.
Yes, it's Love Come What May, backed with Wolfman, released in 1966. The sources note that this version features Randy Fuller's overdubbed vocal.
Since his death, the catalog has been repackaged many times.
There has been a steady stream of compilations, which speaks to the demand. In 1968, shortly after his death, the Bobby Fuller Memorial album was released. In 1983, the Bobby Fuller tapes came out. In 1997, we got a comprehensive box set called Never to Be Forgotten, The Mustang Years. And recently, in 2018, Magic Touch, the complete Mustang singles collection, was released.
When we look at all of this, the home studio innovation, the songwriting, the death, how do we summarize the career?
It is a trajectory that was cut off just as it was fully realizing its potential. He lived a short life, from 1942 to 1966, but in that time, he effectively bridged the gap between the rockabilly of the 1950s and the evolving rock scene of the mid-60s. He kept the spirit of Buddy Holly alive and modernized it.
The factual density of his work is remarkable. He wasn't just a singer, he was an architect of his own sound.
The enduring interest is fueled by both of those factors. The quality of the El Paso rock sound stands on its own merits, and the unanswered questions surrounding his death ensure that the story's never quite finished.
It leaves you with something to consider regarding how music is made today. When you look at the modern landscape of independent artists recording in their bedrooms and bypassing traditional studios, you have to wonder if that entire DIY ethos didn't trace some of its earliest, most vital roots back to a primitive echo chamber in an El Paso backyard. Thank you for this detailed report.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.